In this video segment, we're going to discuss and go over the proper flushing procedures for the whole house dehumidification system. We see and hear of a number of issues out there, and frankly, most of them are related to improper flushing and in some cases, no purging of the reheat coil. Let me point out a few things about the whole house dehumidification system. The whole house dehumidification system has what we call a reheat coil. It is right behind the DX coil. It applies and utilizes a freeze thermostat set to trip at 40 degrees. So when this unit goes into the dehumidification mode, it has a three-way valve. We're going to show you that here in just a few moments. That's going to divert a certain percentage of the warmed fluid, because remember, in the cooling mode we're rejecting temperature into the fluid, and we're going to direct it up through this reheat coil. It's going to stabilize that temperature, leaving the unit going into the home to a near neutral temperature. So again, all it's doing is in fact wringing the moisture out of the air. When you don't properly flush, purge, and burp, we're going to show you that procedure. The reheat coil, what occurs? Well, you again have a situation where the thermostat doesn't know you have this issue, so it's going to try and take the humidity out of the air, which means it doesn't really have the ability to keep that at a neutral temperature, and you're going to overcool the home. Well, that's not giving the customer the product that they purchased. One of the other common mistakes that we see is frequently you'll have a homeowner that, or oftentimes I should say, you will have a homeowner that has a high electric bill. Turns out that in most cases, it really isn't the machine, it's that they set their humidity level far too low. Okay, so try and keep it somewhere around maybe 50%. That's a good neutral temperature or humidity level, and you'll get good savings. So a few things that you need to go through in the process here is, down here on the circuit board, there's a red wire, and it's attached to the accessory one normally open position. This is one of the wires that's controlling the three-way valve. And over here, we actually have our thermistor. Our thermistor is making sure of the temperature that is leaving the box, leaving the heat pump, and going up into the home. So that's what's integrated into the control system so that it will modulate that valve and give it just the right temperature fluid based upon that leaving air temperature. That's how it achieves that neutrality. So when you go to purge one of these units, again, we're going to start in just a moment, a few things you need to do. If it is above 70 degrees, where the sensor is up here in the cabinet, you need to take the white wire down here on our low voltage terminal board, right here, and you just need to disconnect it. You need to just pull it loose, lay it where it won't touch anything of importance. So now you won't be fighting that thermistor again if that cabinet is above 70 degrees. So when we go to start the process, what we will do is, when we're purging with our flush cart, we will actually pull the red wire here off the normally open position and place it right over here on the normally closed. What that's going to do is it's going to energize our three-way motorized valve. You're going to need to wait 45 to 75 seconds for that valve to fully energize into the diverting position so that it's directing all the fluid. We want 100% of the loop fluid going up through our reheat coil, again with a flush cart, 2 feet per second, so we can blow that air out of there. This is not something you're going to achieve with a little circulating pump like a Grundfos loop pump. You must use a flush cart. It's okay if you use a non-pressurized system on these, but only after you have completely eliminated all the air and verified that with the use of a flush cart. If you're going to try and do it with a typical non-pressurized loop pump, you're kidding yourself. It won't happen. They do not have the ability to deliver what it takes to dislodge the air out of this kind of a reheat coil. So we're going to go through that process of going back and forth with that red wire, opening and closing that valve. Now when you de-energize the valve by putting the red wire back over here onto the normally open position, that is a spring-loaded valve, and it will go back to the normally open position fairly quickly because again it has a spring actuator. Okay? We will do this repeatedly until we no longer are getting any air out of the reheat coil. And again, once we finish up the process here, we're going to make sure, before we close up the cabinet of our whole house dehumidification system, that we have placed our terminals back where they need to be. For example, we want to make sure that our red wire is back over here on the normally open accessory 1 terminal, and we want to make sure that we plug back in our thermistor. Okay? Make sure before you close up the box you've reestablished things. So let's go ahead and get started. You're going to need a small flat blade screwdriver to open up the bleed ports. Let me show you the bleed ports here. There's one high and one low. Right here, they're over the top of the drain pan. So that's where your water is going to accumulate. We have another one up here high. Happens to be located right here. You're going to need to get in there and open that up when you have the flush cart operating and applying good pressure and good velocity to make sure you're eliminating all that air. Again, we're going to do this repeatedly until we are confident we have all the air out of that system. So we've already flushed our loop, and now we have our flushing valves on our flow controller directed over here just through the heat pump, just through our whole house dehumidification system. So I'm going to go ahead and double check my connections. My valves are open, and I am ready to start purging. So I've already disabled my thermistor by disconnecting that from the low voltage terminal board. I need to add a little bit of water here to my flush cart because I'm moving some air out of that system. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move my valve wire over here to the normally closed position. And again, I'm going to wait that 45 to 75 seconds for that valve to fully engage so that all of the fluid flow is being directed up into that reheat coil before I attempt to burp the air out. So now that we've waited our 45 to 75 seconds, you'll hear with a proper flush cart, you're going to hear the velocity of the fluid going through this reheat coil. And again, be patient, don't rush it. Make sure that valve is fully engaged. There was no doubt when this one was fully engaged, you could certainly hear that water going through. So if the flush cart's still operating and giving us that velocity, it's time to open up our bleed ports and see if we can get some air out of there. I'm going to go ahead and start with the bottom one. Again, letting it go into the drain pan. Go ahead and close that one up. Now I'm going to come up here to the top one. Now if this is a brand new unit, you're certainly going to want to use a backup wrench to make sure you don't cause any issues here, but this one's been around our lab here for a little while. Getting a little bit of air out of there, seeing it spit a little bit. While patiently doing this process, again, don't rush it. Make sure you've got all the air out. You want to be cautious that you're not dripping or spraying water on the circuit board. Remember, you have to move the wire back and forth with this valve, which means your control box is open and susceptible to moisture if you actually spray water in the wrong direction. So consider that. I'm going to go ahead and shut it off, and I'm going to cycle that valve. Now, as I mentioned before, when you put the red wire back over to the normally open position, it takes just a few moments for that valve to go back to the normal open position, because again, it is spring loaded. So that spring is going to drive it there fairly quickly. You can probably hear now that velocity going through that reheat coil is very quiet at this point, because you really don't have much going through there at all. I'm going to go ahead and give it the normal closed position. Again, I'm going to wait that patient 45 to 75 seconds. And I'm going to repeat this process over and over and over. And guys, sometimes you'll do it 7, 8, 9, 10 times to make sure you get all that air out. Okay, that's using a proper flush cart, 2 feet per second velocity. Okay, make sure you're getting no signs, no indications of air out of that reheat coil before you reestablish everything, put it back to its normal operating position. To avoid callbacks, make sure you have a happy customer and harvest referrals. So again, what's a final review? Make sure you put this red wire back to the normally open position on accessory 1, and make sure if you disabled by disconnecting the thermistor that you connect that back up to its original landing point on that low voltage terminal board.